Hello, this is Anna Laura Brown, host of the Autoimmune Rehab Podcast, where we talk about how to actually thrive and heal your autoimmune condition rather than just covering it up with pills or changing your diet and hoping you'll feel better one day. We feature solo episodes on helpful topics and interviews with guests who have actually walked in your shoes with autoimmune disorders and or who have years of experience in helping people to thrive and not just survive with autoimmune challenges. I'm a health coach who started this podcast because I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2018 and I wanted to inspire hope and transform health for people with autoimmune challenges. So keep listening and let's get you the help and hope you really need. This is the Autoimmune Rehab Podcast. And today I am really happy to have Clare George here with me, all the way from across the pond in the UK. And she is going to start off by introducing herself. So why don't you tell us about yourself, Clare?
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast, Anna Laura. I'm really excited for our conversation today. And to let you know a little bit about myself, my name's Clare George. I'm AKA the Health Habits Coach. And as the name suggests, I practice as a health coach in health habits. But I think why I've possibly been invited onto the show today is to get into a bit of my background. Back in 2011, tick bite in Vermont, and got chronic Lyme disease and autoimmune condition. It was like a catalyst that flicked a switch. And I'm sure we're going to get into that today on the different repercussions for me, my health, my life, as a result of a sort of beginning that journey with managing autoimmune condition and then reinventing my whole sort of self into this space of being a health coach to help others like me and others that are completely not like me with their health and their complicated health landscapes I think we might be getting into.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And for those that have listened to a lot of the other episodes, they'll know this. For those that, this might be the first time they're listening, or maybe only second time or so, that Lyme is a big trigger for autoimmune. I will just put that out there. I've talked to quite a few guests that have had their autoimmune triggered by Lyme. And so if you are in a situation where your autoimmune is not under control and you are listening to this thinking that you feel sick a lot of the time, if you haven't at least really done your due diligence to try to make sure that Lyme is not a thing for you, you probably definitely need to, because Lyme can be one of those co-infections that can definitely trigger autoimmune. So, yeah. So share with us a little bit more about how that worked. So you got Lyme and then that triggered the autoimmune, but how did you figure that all out? Like, was it
It,
complicated trying to find out that you had Lyme in the first place? How did that work?
yeah, you raise a good point because the beginning is often, I call it a first domino, whether I'm coaching on preventing type 2 diabetes and reducing your sugar, with first domino is breakfast of the day. But with my Lyme disease and with anyone with a health journey, there's always a beginning, and how we take in that beginning and what we do, our first steps often lead to our next steps. So they're really important. And what I ended up doing, I'd literally just finished a master's in social program development. And I had specially, I'd done a lot of focus research and most of my modules on decision making, on systems thinking, on mapping complex landscapes. Now, granted, it was more for like an earthquake zone and how to deliver international aid in that setting. It wasn't for an individual human body, but it had taught me just, how to sort of start to unlock complexity. But to go back really to the root, the root of it, when I first got the bite, hadn't even heard of a tick. I'd been in New York for a couple of weeks. We'd moved there permanently, but I'd only just arrived. I had no doctor. I had no friends network. I had no family. It was 2011. There was nothing in my little Brit brain that was alerted to ticks and Lyme disease and that whole conversation. So I was a complete walking newbie into the space. And yeah, I basically, within hours of having a bite, didn't even really notice. I noticed a little spot on my leg. I didn't get the bullseye rash, so I wasn't treated as such. And I was a Brit with no doctor. So I have to say my experience, to cut it quick for today's podcast, it wasn't good. I was ignored by multiple doctors. I wasn't helped by many different practitioners, from pharmacists to nurse practitioners to MDs. And that was the first few weeks. I even ended up at ER in Lenox Hill in New York City, and paid the pricely sum of about $1,800 in 2008 to be given a prescription of Advil and be told on your way, there's nothing wrong with you. It's midlife woman, and it was a bit of that going on. So I had to figure it out, and I used that master's, and I started looking at my timeline, at what my symptoms were, of what I thought, what research I could do online, what was available to me. And then I got a lucky break in that a friend of mine had had a stroke when she was only 43 and living in the States. And she knew of this internist, and she had no idea. And I went and saw him, and he happened to be the internist on an Animal Planet show, Monsters Inside Me, aka the 30 odd different species of bacteria and types of that trigger Lyme disease or versions of it. And so although I never got a diagnosis because I couldn't pass all the little required 1979 checklists, they haven't changed it as far as I'm aware since. And so because I couldn't get treated for my symptoms, let alone the root cause. So that was really challenging, really exhausting. It was like a bomb dropped on my whole landscape of my life. I was a mom with 3 young children under the age of 8. I was trying to set them up at a new school. I was trying to get them little new friends in New York City. We were in a small apartment. I was absolutely exhausted, had that chronic fatigue syndrome, had brain fog, had aches, pains, couldn't finish sentences. My eyesight went blurry. I had anemia. And then because of the takedown on my gut health, I ended up with toxoplasmosis, H. pylori, a whole range of multiple challenges for my body and my health as a system. And so, yeah, it was a complicated journey, but bit by bit. And that's why I ended up becoming the health habits coach, because what I learned was I'm fighting a war on multiple fronts, and I need to take one down at a time and stop trying to solve everything all at once in a very short time scale. And I would say that was really came down to an emotional acceptance that this was my reality now. And that took about 6 months.
Wow.
But once I'd got that, because I'm a fighter, I'd solo traveled the world. I'd been from the Amazon to the Himalaya as a solo traveler. I'm like, I can beat this. I'd never been ill in my life. My first blood test was with a doctor at 29 to say, yes, you're pregnant, Claire. That was my first ever blood work in my life. I'd never been ill. I'd never had antibiotics. And I'd traveled the world and never been ill. I'd not had Delhi belly in Delhi. I was so healthy. And so my identity of being this super powered, healthy woman to this debilitated person that couldn't even walk a 5-minute, 3 blocks in New York City, couldn't read a story, a bedtime story to my kids, because by, 5, 6 o'clock in the day, that was it. I'd got nothing left. And so that was just a huge, huge identity shift for me. But once I got over that, and once I got that acceptance going and the emotional acceptance, I'd say that was when it was real worm that turned. Then I started putting my brain into action on, okay, this is it. What's that psychology reflection cycle? I can't remember who designed it, but it goes, what, so what, now what? And that was my moment where I did that.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and I think that always can be really helpful. What, so what, now what? Yeah, for sure. So back for a minute to that one doctor that you mentioned that had been on Animal Planet. Was he still able to help you, though, along with this journey, even though he couldn't give you an official diagnosis necessarily?
Yeah, what he did, as it happened, because we'd been kind of messed up by my husband's health insurance, because obviously in the States, a lot of it's about your health insurance as to how you'll get handled and what will get investigated, especially when you're talking a whole body system of symptoms and stuff. And he was brilliant because he believed me, and that's all you need. In that moment, you just need somebody of authority, of credibility, a medical professional to look at you and go, I hear you and I see you. Let's try and figure out what I can do. Whereas all the other doctors, in fact, most of the specialists I saw, They from, you know, hematologist to neurologist to endocrinologist to, I mean, a gastroenterologist. Like I was just, I mean, I had 3 emergency brain MRIs because they thought I was slipping into MS. But what this doctor did, his name was Dr. Ilario. He's since retired, and but he really, I would take in like little pieces of kitchen paper where I'd scribble down my random symptoms, and I'd be like, and it was me that said, I think it's autoimmune. This is autoimmune. That's the only thing that's making sense to my research mind. And he agreed and said, then he said, okay, well, let's just make sure that you've not got one of the multiple options when it comes to autoimmune conditions. So he just started writing, you know, scripts for me to go and see all these specialists, which was very exhausting and didn't end up doing anything, except it did tell me, no, you haven't got myasthenia gravis. No, you haven't got MS. No, you haven't got lupus. No, you haven't got, you know, so it was really, really good because ruling out what I hadn't got helped me at least. And also you feel like you're doing something. And I was a very doing kind of person. We each are different in that respect. But for me, the thought that I was trying and doing was an important part of my recovery, I think. And just building up this knowledge of myself, of my body from all these different experts' positions. And what I was going to say on the health insurance was that my husband, because we didn't know anything, didn't know better, being, you know, dumb Brits and all that kind of thing, we'd been sold the wrong by the it was a big company, and they were like, oh, you should just do the what's it called, the non-deductible or whatever, the deductible, not the copay. You should just do the deductible. Well, my deductible was $7,500.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Ilario is just like, oh, you know, and I didn't really understand it, right? I didn't understand. So I was just like, okay. But then once it got very quickly, like I say, a couple of grand on an ER visit one Saturday morning, I'm already a third of the way. And so what happened was that I'd met my deductible. And once I'd met my deductible and I was with an internist who was like, yeah, let's go explore your body, it meant that I literally had every test, endoscopies, colonoscopies, like nerve tests, nerve ending tests. I had so many, the bone density, cancers, like all these different things. And yeah, so it was a brilliant, as I've got 2 Masters of Science. So I'm always interested in data. If I'm trying to help a person in my coaching group solve their, you know, their health complexity or situation, and the more data I've got, the more we can be strategic. And that's what that then led to me having this bank of data on me that we then used to build up and act.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's awesome. So now let's talk about, I know that mapping chronic health landscapes is something that you really focus on. So why don't you describe for us for a few minutes here what those are and how do those help with autoimmune conditions?
Yeah, so first off, you know, a bit of explanation of what I mean, because obviously we can interpret it lots of different ways. But as I said, I was a solo traveler and I always loved geography. In fact, I did do specialist geography and college level geography and geology mapping. So I'm a bit of a maps girl. I was always known, the only compliment my mum almost ever paid me was, you're very good at reading a map before the days of sat nav. She can find you, she can get you anywhere, you know. And the thing is that is because I could see all the details in the map, the contour lines, and that's what mapping really is all about. It's if you put it in words, it would just be a mess. It would just look like a mess of information, of data, of ideas. But if you turn it into a map and you turn it into a visual picture of that complex, you know, sort of information, then your brain can learn how to read it in a quick way. And so what I did was then, as I said, mentioned earlier, my master's, my first master's, I learned how to map a system. And a system is where you've got like an entire kind of, if you think of it like a circle, and my Lyme disease was at the middle of the circle. And then there were all these things affecting me. And I shouldn't say Lyme disease, my autoimmune condition was at the middle of this circle. And I mapped out a rich picture of all the things that, how it impacted me. Was it my education and knowing these things to go do, the doctor's visits and all the things that came from that, you know, my diet, my movement, my energy levels, all these different pieces of information. And I mapped it out like a spray diagram, I suppose. And but then I'd use images and little diagrams to convey emotions rather than words. And then you can start to really build up this rich picture of your landscape around the health condition, your autoimmune condition. And then scooting forwards to sort of recent times, a couple of years ago, I did a master's in health psychology, which is it's the biopsychosocial aspects of health, but it's more about the experience of health as opposed to clinical diagnosis, and how we experience our health condition affects our physical expression of that health condition. So how we're experiencing our autoimmune condition will really impact the severity of the symptoms you feel you're having. And so I got into that, and then I worked at a GP practice, and I one-to-one mapped about 750 different patients in a medical practice, their health landscapes. So it wasn't really relevant what the condition was. Many of them weren't autoimmune. But autoimmune to me is one of the most fascinating because it really is the most complex of all the different health conditions and situations that I would help a patient with. Autoimmune, you're going to be involving your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual and your social health. You're going to be, so those 4 dimensions of health, according to the World Health Organization. You're also going to be experiencing all that influences, your environment, your relationships, your work, your money, and these kinds of things. So this is whereby we bring it all together, and by being able to make more of a sense of the whole landscape of your health, and by breaking down, seeing the wood for the trees, if you like, is another way of saying it. And by doing that, it allows you to spot, what are my strengths, what's working, what are my weaknesses, where am I struggling, you know, and these kinds of simple questions, you can then prioritize your weak spots of your health landscape, and you can say, right, that's the thing that's really disrupting and hurting me on a day-to-day basis. So that's where my number one focus should be on. And by mapping in this way that I'm describing, you get away from scattergunning. And that's the number one thing I think that nobbles people living with autoimmune conditions, is that they do a bit of this. Oh, I ate these foods, and then I eliminated that food, and then I tried to do, I don't know, morning walk in nature, and then I did a meditation. But there's no consistent, strategic, systemic, and systematic rollout of your route map to healing. And that's what a map and the way in which I approach it, I believe, does for people.
That's awesome. That's amazing. So that's one thing that you can do for people then, right? As the health habits coach. So if somebody wants to learn more about that, do you have like a resource that they can learn more about it? Would they reach out to you directly? How would that work?
Yeah, so I do have a couple of resources. I have a health audit. It's just like an audit on a company where they audit all the different departments and what's going on from, you know, top to bottom. And that's what we want to do with our health. And it's called the Health Audit. It's on my website, www.thehealthhabitscoach.com. And you will find it there. But I really, really encourage anyone listening who's interested in what I've been talking about today. Obviously, it's a lot, and we only have a certain amount of time. But if I piqued your interest, if you want to know more, then do reach out to me. You can find me on my website or check out my podcast as well, Health Habits Coach podcast. But do connect with me, because it's a very personal space, isn't it, Anna, Laura, the autoimmune community?
Absolutely, it is. And I always tell people that if they're, I mean, back to this whole idea of mapping autoimmune, all this stuff, that if you've ever been to a doctor and the doctor just kind of dismissed you and said whatever, even when you have all these symptoms, you can pretty much be guaranteed it's an autoimmune.
Yeah, and this is the thing that, like, it you know, what's interesting to me is right now I'm sort of launching my program around menopause and midlife women's health, and there's an increase of up to sort of about 80%, depends on the particular condition, but up to 80% increase after the age of 40 for autoimmune with women. And so it's very related to that phase of life. So as the health habits coach, I'm a very holistic, coach, but it's really is about those different health habits. Once I've got my landscape mapped, once I know what I'm trying to change, now what's the best strategy and what are the individual habits I need to put into place to get that change happening in alignment with my goals. And so that's really, so it's less about the condition, it's more about the individual and applying, doing more exercise. Yeah, but what exercise and when and how often and what's right for me? And if we're living with autoimmune conditions, it's not as simple as following a gym program with that example. There's a lot of extra challenges for a person, and you need to do things your way. You need to do things that are right for you. But definitely getting support. And I love the resources that you do, Anna Laura, with your podcast, and the resource sort of signposting that you offer to help people reach out and connect with specific people that will help them with their particular condition or their particular phase of life or, particular symptoms. It's really, really helpful to get targeted as well as the breadth.
Absolutely, for sure, of course. Yeah. So like you touched on, you could talk to 20 different people that all have the same autoimmune diagnosis, and they're all going to have a little bit of a different experience, different needs, different things like that. But since you are the health habits coach, after all, let's maybe end the podcast today by sharing with us, what do you think are a couple of the top key health habits that pretty much anybody with an autoimmune condition should be embracing on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever basis?
I really think there's top one, like above all else, it's the pinnacle, and it's self-care. And it's that real kind of trusting ourselves that we do know what's best for ourselves. Because very often we are quite alone in different ways when we're experiencing autoimmune. And so it's really important to know your boundaries. That's another important sort of aspect of habits. Like sometimes I am talking exercise and diet, a lot of the time, but then very often it can be, I can be helping somebody within my preventing type 2 diabetes. And really all I'm trying to do is get them to do a bit more self-care and become more aware of their energy levels. Because I do think that chronic fatigue is one of the core. It's like I mentioned earlier, for me, try and find your first domino. And if chronic fatigue then leads to all these other symptoms or exacerbations in your life because you've pushed yourself a bit too hard, because you've agreed to something that you actually don't really have the energy to do, or you didn't feel like you could say to them, actually, I need to back out of that plan. It's come to the moment and I'm not up to walking out the door. And it's that, when I say self-care, it's that willingness to really be like, who's number one right now? It has to be me. My health isn't great, isn't ideal. And so I have to put, prioritizing your health. And that is about not just money, though can be important, but your two key resources, your time and your energy. And if you can more and more say, my health is worth my time, is worth my energy, is worth my money, then you'll start to really operate from this self-care place.
That's awesome. I love it. So anything else you want to share with us that we didn't get around to?
I'm not sure. I mean, I do so many things, as you can imagine from all I've said already. Like I've kind of bomb dropped quite a few things. I think that really just saying that I don't specialize in autoimmune, that I am very much I'm a woman in midlife that loves helping people who aren't green fields, that have got a bit of muck. I live on a farm. I've got a bit of muck in their lives, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is hard, and this is getting me down. And what should I do? And I just love it when somebody says, Claire, what do you reckon I should do? So if you've got that question going on, reach out. I'd love to help.
That's awesome. Cool. Yeah. Well, we will, of course, have your website and your contact information, your bio linked in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on, Claire. And if you enjoyed this episode, please go on to either Apple or Spotify and rate us. And we'd love to have a review. I'd love to hear your feedback as well. Thanks. Take care. Until we'll catch you soon on another episode of Autoimmune Rehab.